Hey guys, welcome back to Camp Ara's YouTube channel. We loved last week so much, we're going to do it again as we talked. If you didn't catch last video, hop on YouTube, search Camp Ara. You'll see our survival retreat video, the first one, as we start to go over the 7 skills that we're going to be utilizing for our survival retreats. I'm Andrew, I'm the camp director here at Camp Ara, and this is my wife Jen.
Hey guys, I'm Jen, his wife, like you said, marketing and communications director here. This is Zoe, our very loud golden retriever.
All right, so this week we are going over shelter building. Now last week I just want to recap what we talked about. This is going to be our 3rd skill that we're talking about this week. However, the first 2, do you want to kind of go over what we...
Yeah, we just started with some basics, which there wasn't much hands-on for. This video really starts our hands-on stuff, which we're excited about. Last week it was a little more classroom setting, and it was really the first basic scout principle of survival is to stop, which was to stop, think, observe, and plan.
Heck yeah.
Which helps you just stop, be aware of what's going on around you, figure out what you need to do, utilize resources around you, etc., make a plan, and go from there.
Yeah, and as we talked, those plans are really going to, using stop is going to be throughout the whole process. It's not just the initial thing. However, it's really important to do that first, regardless of what happens, and then to keep using that skill throughout the time that you're stuck or in
whatever
emergency.
situation you're in. Yeah.
And the second one was first aid, and we talked about a lot of the things, the obvious things of cuts, broken bones,
preserving life.
Yeah, so the
I remember that one.
she's talking about the purpose of first aid, and that's to preserve life,
reduce further injury, and promote healing.
Promote recovery.
Recovery.
Yeah,
there you go.
So we talked about first aid and a lot of the things that you can see, and then we also addressed some of the things that you can't see, and that includes some of our...
Yeah, mental awareness and being aware of fatigue and the more internal things.
Yeah, yeah, and really kind of how long have you been out in the woods already, because that can really put a drain on you.
Yeah.
And then we had a couple things. This is our tin can, as we talked in our scenario. You guys are going to be able to bring a backpack to our retreat. But we're reducing it down to a tin can for our survival retreat. And every week we're going to go and add something that we would put in for the topic that we've covered that week. And
right.
Last week I added a hand warmer, kept in the bag because we can use the bag, multi-purpose. And then Jen added the flashlight.
The headlamp, yeah.
And why did you add the flashlight?
That was, again, first aid oriented, and it was in that more mental fortitude aspect of being in the dark, and being able to overcome that.
And preventing
further
injury
by being in the dark, not being able to see.
Nothing worse than tripping over rocks or falling down a ravine that you didn't see was
Absolutely.
there. Yeah. So this week, instead of doing it at the end, we're going to kind of talk about what we're going to put in first, because you're going to see us use those. But really, the third one is shelter, and the reason this is the third skill is because the average person can survive about 3 hours in the elements.
Exposed
elements, and it's really important that we protect ourselves from those elements if we know we're going to be out there for an extended period of time. And our scenario is that we essentially have realized whatever happens, we're not going to make it out of the woods before dark.
Right.
And we're just not going to travel at dark.
Right. So we're out here now. It's about 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon, which gives us a few hours before dark, because it's getting dark now about 5 o'clock. So trying to make it as realistic as possible, where we really only have that couple of hours to get a shelter up.
Yep. So that third one is what we're doing today, and that's shelter. Now it is just us two, as we're going to do. Now you might have a family with you, as we talked last week. You might just be by yourself. You could have a larger group, and we're going to talk about as we go the pros and cons to really dividing out shelters or putting a massive effort into doing one shelter.
Yeah.
Now, as we look around, we don't have anybody manning the cameras today. All of our kids are doing homework. However, the very first thing we want to do is seek shelter, and this really comes from both the military side and the scout side, is that to consume as little calories as possible.
If there's a shelter available.
If there's something available, let's use it. So
right.
What are some things that you can think of that might be shelters out, like natural shelters out in the woods?
So I mean, you could find caves or other old man-made structures that are more dilapidated, or anything like that.
Yeah, and fallen trees make good ones, especially if the ball root of the tree has come
Pulled
up,
up.
has been uprooted, because a lot of times it'll make this wall and it digs a hole around and it gives that natural shelter already. Now there's a couple of those on the property. However, we wanted to come out where there was really nothing in place. So with that said, this isn't the only shelter to build, guys. And really the important thing here is just being comfortable with what your skill is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's going to be the best tools you have. Instead of just trying to find out what's on a video and copying exactly and never practicing that.
If you have no idea what a lean-to is, then we wouldn't recommend you going out in the woods and trying to build one without learning how to build it first, right?
And practice it. And that's really the kind of the goal of this retreat. So we're going to kind of dive in. Jen's, again, under the weather a little bit, but that could very well happen if we're on a hike. You know, you might just say, I'm going to suck it up for a day hike, and then next thing you know, we're stuck.
Yeah, this is the first time I've been out of bed in a couple of days. Our whole family's kind of been back and forth with a head cold. So, yeah, if I sit down or cough a lot, it's
not COVID, guys.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it's a sinus infection. But
Yeah.
we're going to push through, and if we have to pause a couple times, I'm sure she'll just edit it out. We're going to be good to go. All right, so this week I put in something that maybe you guys are familiar with. It's paracord. You guys might see 550 cord. Really, for our purposes, the differences in the type of cord, you could use twine, jute cord, nylon rope. Really, there's some pros and cons to a lot of different ones. The reason I like 550 cord is its strength, its durability in the weather, and really it's just lightweight. It doesn't take up a lot of.
I love that it's fluorescent yellow. Like there's no possibility of losing that out here.
Multi-purpose. Yeah. The worst thing you could do is drop something that is completely.
You could
black or
SOS
brown.
with that thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, signaling's coming up in one of our skills, so I'm looking forward to that. So this is what I brought, and you guys will see how we're going to use it.
Yeah. So mine, which could really realistically be in your can or on your belt, is a multi-tool. It obviously serves multiple purposes, but when building a shelter, it's going to come in handy a lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things on here that we're going to talk about next week, because next week is fire starting. It's got flint and steel built into this. Not all of them do, but again, if you got a tool that you're really familiar with, it makes a useful tool. If you've never opened it before, it's not going to be much more than some dead weight, what you accidentally figure out. So, like she said, you could have that on your belt. It doesn't necessarily have to go in your can. We're going to allow what you would normally have on a day hike. I've got a sheath knife on my belts that I would normally carry on a day hike, so we'll be using that too. So, well, let's get started.
Let's do it.
This is essentially the end product after about an hour and a quarter's worth of work. The only material we used was about 2 small strands of paracord. Now this does require a lot more work, any kind of shelter. This is just a debris hut, something that's going to fit us and our family, which was kind of what our scenario was that we talked about. But again, depending on for the survival retreat, depending who you bring, could be just you, which would be a lot smaller. Now, I don't know how much she's able to get in or not, but there is a natural stone pile that was here. We actually have kind of faced off. So next week when we do our fire, you can see kind of how we'll have reflective. Now, also at the beginning of next week, I'm going to have a tarp to kind of just show you. We're going to do a quick tarp setup next to this one to show you just how much quicker that's the tarp shelter. And there's many different types of tarp shelters that we can do, but with ridgepole or just even a paracord ridgepole and a tarp, we'll have it set up in about 5 to 10 minutes. And it'll work the same way where we have the fire and reflecting into that tarp area. Now again, we're just overnight. This shelter was more of just a setup of using very minimal of what we had on us and still able to provide a shelter for us and our kids. It's not going to be necessarily comfortable, but it would protect us from the elements, keep us out of the wind, and provide some shelter for the heat so we could stay warm overnight. Now, next week again, the very first one we did was stop. Jen's shaking her head. I'm not sure if oh, it's Zoe. She's laughing at Zoe, our helper. How many of you guys go on hikes with your dogs? So next week, or actually last week, we talked about stop, which is stop, think, observe, and plan. We talked about first aid, and then we're into shelter because of about 3 hours, the average exposure to the elements, unprotected, that somebody can handle. Now with that said, we talked about using stop and first aid throughout. The goal for this, the reason it took an hour and a quarter, there was no rush. There was breaks that we took in between. Jen not feeling well, she stopped to drink quite a bit of water, which we're going to talk about later on. But the main thing is just conserving energy, taking your time, not rushing through it. Ultimately, again, 3 hours in the elements, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. Even though you might feel a little uneasy, you get really thirsty, you're not going to die unless you're obviously ill or have other things. Obviously, those times are shortened depending on your health and body structure and stuff like that. But the main thing is we want to get out of the elements, and then we're going to work on fire next, which is going to help us with our couple steps down is water. All right. So next week we're doing fire building. I'm going to show you the tarp shelter real quick as we do. So we want to show that reflective heat coming in. We're going to talk about cooking on the fire and getting all set up with every different types of fire building without matches or lighters. So stay tuned for next week. Again, we'd love your comments based on this shelter. Go ahead and just let us know what you guys think, what you would do differently. Or if you just would go straight out with the tarp. Now, again, we're going to show that next week. Next week's fire building. I hope you guys can join us. Thanks for coming. See you next time.